Literature International webinar titled Women's Day Equity, Not Just Equality, in commemoration of International Women's Day 2023 by the Department of English at Khaja Bandanawaz University. I am Dr. Athiya Sultana, Assistant Professor of English, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all and introduce you to the subject that we have on hand. In the chapter titled Infection in the Sentence, Sandra and Susan talk about the questions feminist literary criticism turns to. Does a woman talk back in her own vocabulary, her own timbre, insisting on her own viewpoint? These are the questions we think about in all our readings in and any literary text. These are some of the questions we also would like to turn to today through this webinar. We would like to look at feminism through fresh approaches and how writers have looked at it in their novels since the new millennium. And to do this, we have with us today Dr. Sakshi Chanana, a guest speaker here with us today. I extend a very warm welcome to her, Dr. Sakshi, Professor Nishad Arif Hussaini, Dean Faculty of Languages, Sciences, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and Chairperson, Department of English, and all the professors, associate professors, assistant professors, research scholars, and student participants across the states. Before Dr. Sakshi enlightens us all, I request Ms. Zainab, Assistant Professor, to introduce a guest speaker to us. Over to you, Zainab.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Atya, for giving me the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Sakshi Chanana. She is Assistant Professor of English at School of Liberal Studies in the University of Petroleum and Energy Studies, UPES in Dehradun, Uttarakhand. She has done her PhD in popular culture from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. She has been teaching for the past 14 years in different universities, including Delhi University, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Kathmandu University. She teaches Digital Humanities, a foundation course at UPES. She has also been a Fulbright scholar from the University of Notre Dame, USA. She has published two poetry books and has organized creative writing workshops across different places. Dr. Sakshi is an enthusiastic speaker and has been invited in multiple workshops and talks entitled Communication in the Age of Facebook and Instagram, Literature in Times of Pandemic, and many others. Now, I request Dr. Sakshi to please take the session ahead and share her valuable point of view about the webinar's topic, that is Women's Day, Equity, Not Just Equality, to the participants.
Thank you so much, Zainab. I would like to, first of all, take a moment and thank everyone in the organization to introduce this wonderful topic for students. So thank you, Dr. Atya. Thank you to your respected dean and everyone who has taken out time today to be here. It's my honor to be here with you all and to be able to share my perspectives. So I'm going to actually start. I was very fascinated by the title. Sounds more like a political science or a social scientist perspective than a literary one. Equity and not just equality. So I think the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is equality really? Does it always entail equity? Ever heard of the phrase glass ceiling? How do we understand these terms, equality and equity, beyond their literal meanings? So I'm sure most of you are aware how equality refers to a sense of being equal irrespective of your sex and gender. However, equity means the right to fairness, the right to have equal and fair treatment, no matter where you are situated, where you are positioned in society, in whatever position. So I think for me, especially last year also, I remember there's one NGO, Umran, last year on Women's Day, I had spoken about solidarity in women's poetry. And I think there are some central questions that we must ask ourselves when we are talking about women, not only on a Women's Day, but otherwise as well. So I think few central questions around Women's Day should be, about our place and our space in society, which means when I say what is a woman's place in society, it encompasses various nuances, like how are you placed economically, how are you placed socially, if you are at a workplace, how quickly you are getting promoted. Do you have that glass ceiling that Priyanka Chopra talks about very often and says breaking the glass ceiling is a new trend, so as to say. So that is one question that we as women and we as men also should always ask ourselves. So if you are a man, the question you should be asking yourself is, am I more privileged? Am I facilitating the equality and equity that I talk about in my class, in my everyday life or not? When I go back home, am I meeting women in my life in the same way as I theorize in the classroom? So I think it is time, because you mentioned that we're trying to look at feminism from new approach. So I think it's time that we start kind of building praxis around all the theorizing that has been going on around feminism for years and years. Another central question for me is a question of space and privilege. When I say space, space is a very unique and very funny concept as well. So I remember as a child, if you have ever traveled in a public transport, you would see that if there are 5 or 6 family members, the men generally, at least in childhood, to my memory, in a local bus or in a local public transport, would take as much space as possible, even the physical space for that matter. Whereas women by nature are always told to be constricted. Oh, you can fit in anywhere. So I'm very tiny and frail woman. So I have been told this so many times. Oh, you can just fit in here. You can just sit here. Like you do not have the right to hold that space. So I think space is very important and integral part. And as women, when you go out and you mark out your space, then it is an act of feminism to me. So there is another example that comes to my mind. I think 2-3 years ago in Delhi University, there was this whole movement, Pinjara Tod. So there was this whole restrictions on women, hostel timings, this, that, but not for men. So I think space again becomes an integral part there. And when we talk about questions of place, we talk about questions of space, we are also talking very subtly then about, do you have a voice? As a woman, do you really have a voice? When I say, do you have a voice? So I would just want to take a quick minute here, and maybe if there are students around, can anybody tell me, what do you think it means to have a voice? Literally, of course, we all, when you're speaking, you're using voice, but can anybody kind of comment on this? What do you think it means to have your voice? And do you think women in your life have a voice of their own? Do you think they're allowed to have a voice of their own? What are some of the challenges that you think that you or any woman that you see in your life has? So you can just raise your hand, maybe. Anyone? All right, okay. Fine, we'll continue. So this can be one example of you not having a voice, when you are like, oh, I'm not going to raise my hand and speak, for different reasons, not just because you're a woman. So when we say that a woman must have a voice, and I think that is one of the central themes of all the feminist movements that have gone, all the feminist waves that we talk about. I'll come to that in a minute. But one last question that I think we must address before we delve deep into writers or theorists who have talked about feminism is, and for me it is the most significant question around feminism, which is, do you have the right to choose? It could be as simple as deciding where you want to go out and eat, or it could be as monumental as at your workplace, do you get to make decisions? In your house, do you get to make decisions? So I think if I talk about feminism today, apparently so-called in fourth wave, I think the right to choose would become a very important question therein. So having said this context, I also want to kind of bring in and talk a little bit about a brief history of feminism. So feminism, as we know, is all about equality, but today we are talking, it is not only equality, but we are looking more at equity. So the first wave of feminism primarily talked about political rights of women, right? So at that time, having the right to vote was the most significant revolution or rebellion, so as to say, that you could have. Second wave of feminism primarily dealt with gender roles. It kind of started talking about oppression. It kind of started talking about how women have been oppressed over a period of time because of patriarchy and the whole history of chauvinism, how the centers of power have always been with men, so on and so forth. Third wave of feminism, which roughly starts somewhere in 1990s, continued, I would rather say, till 2015-16, before Me Too movement. The third wave of feminism more or less focused on sexuality, gender, race, all the questions which bring women to a larger podium, which bring women to the forefront of how things were happening. Because by 1990s, women had also acquired more economic independence than the last two phases. And fourth wave, so some theorists agree that we are in fourth wave, some theorists do not. But more or less, the Me Too movement, I'm sure all of us are aware of that. Me Too movement kind of signified that phenomenal change, which made us kind of say that, oh, maybe we are in fourth wave of feminism right now. So all these waves of feminism that have historically and politically and socio-politically governed have had their own shares of successes and have had their own shares of failures, right? The fact that we are still talking about women empowerment in 21st century sadly tells us that these are the questions that have not really been resolved that much as we would have really expected them to. And I'm very fascinated by some of the central works of theorists like Simone de Beauvoir, one of the earliest feminists, who spoke about how one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. And when she says that, what she's implying is that all the characteristics that are ascribed to being a woman are primarily socially constructed. And when I say the attributes are socially constructed, what it means is that a woman is always placed in comparison to a man. She has to perform all the roles, all the duties as designated, as designed, as defined by those in power, and which is patriarchy, right? And when Simone de Beauvoir talked about one is not born a woman, one becomes one, or fast forward to 20th century when Gloria Steinem talks about as if women matter, and she did a lot of work on Indian women as well, and she talked about how there are these little subtle ways in which patriarchy still continues to have hold, not only on Indian women but women at large. Or if you talk about Gayatri Spivak's concept of subaltern, so subaltern would refer to anyone who has a voice, of course, and that's why I asked the question on voice in the beginning, who has a voice but cannot use that voice, is not allowed to use that voice. So I think in many ways, women have come a long way, but still there is a part of, there is a whole, there is a majority of women who are still subaltern in that sense. Forget about rural women, but even the educated women, even the women who hold, eminent positions in society, who have a lot going on for them, are still subaltern in so many ways. So the question then is, what is it that is stopping us? In spite of all the wonderful schemes, so if you look at India, there are so many laws already in favor of women. There's a Domestic Violence Act. There is 2013 Vishakha guidelines for sexual harassment at workplace. And if you look at girl child, there are schemes for scholarship for single girl child, and there are there's Ujjwala scheme, so on and so forth. But in spite of all the schemes, not only at our level, but also at world level, there are things that are still not changing. There are things which are still somehow repeating themselves. It's like a cycle, it's like a pattern. And just to take a little bit detour, I want to kind of talk a little bit about here literature. So when you look at literature, primarily English literature, whether it is in translation or written in first language, there have been amazing women writers who are famous now, but in their times, they were just women writers in the sense that they did not receive that kind of acknowledgement, they did not receive that kind of appreciation or laurels that they should have. So Simone de Beauvoir, of course, now we look back and we read them and say that, okay, they did great work. Or if you look at how political rights were achieved in the first place, how does anyone know about this famous case, Wade versus Roe in US? It gathered a lot of attention, I think, last year. So that ruling was passed sometime, I think, 25 years ago, but it was turned down this year or last year. So basically, that has to do with right to abort in US, and that was turned down, which means women in US, apparently the first world country, now of course there has been a lot of pushback to this law. So to think and imagine that we are in a phase of feminism where things are changing, and then you happen to witness a law, a policy like this, which again, takes us back to 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and that too, mind you, not in South Asia but in US, says a lot about where we are headed or how things are changing. I want to now kind of talk a little bit about how feminism or how equality or equity is voiced in literature or is utilized in literature. So if you are a literature student, you would be, of course, familiar with names like Margaret Atwood, Alice Walker, closer home Kamala Das, first feminist writer Virginia Woolf. So Virginia Woolf happens to be one of my favorite. I think many people would agree, like they would probably be on the same page. So Virginia Woolf famously said one thing, which was, if a woman has to be successful, she must have a room of her own, right? A room of one's own, and money, of course, which means economic independence. And that question of space that we talked about are very central to a woman actually receiving whatever she wants from her life. Further, in literature, if you see, there is always this representation of women as powerful. If you look at feminist writers like Atwood, or if you look at Alice Walker, if you look at Virginia Woolf. However, if you look at the other part of literature, the other part that is not written by feminist writers or even written majorly by men, women have been always cast in a certain box, right? There are certain attributes that are ascribed to them. There are certain things which are expected of them. And of course, we call them gender roles, we call them stereotypes. And I believe as long as those stereotypes, as long as those roles are in place, we are not going to actually really be able to see the change that we are really, really striving for in our society. So can you, in your, I have never been to this part of India, so can anyone tell me what are some of the stereotypes that you have faced as a woman, or some of the stereotypes that you see around you? Come on, let's have some opinion. Men can also speak. I mean, it's not only for women. So Zainab, you have to tell your students. Okay, so is that Zubia?
Dr. Sakshi.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's not as much about stereotypes as about women taking on the mantle of a role themselves. This is fairly the South has always been fairly conservative, but at the same time, it's a, how would you say, a more accommodating region of the country. I think it happens in most big, large countries. The South is always a bit softer. Here also in Gulbarga, which is also known as Kalaburgi, we have, there are stereotypes in the sense that the traditional role of women, which you pointed out, that women are cast into molds and roles. So that traditional role is uh, quite common and followed by most women, whether it's in the way they dress or whether it's in the way they take up their job. But there are always a person, a couple of persons, there are always people who are moving away.
Right.
And it is heartening to see that girls and women are taking up those parts or those roles in society which they usually normally never used to take.
Okay.
So I'll let you continue, Miss.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nishat. I'm saying your name right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So, as Dr. Nishat also mentioned, that I think it's true not only of India but also other parts of the world. In different pockets, there are different regions which. Yeah. Okay. Sanghamitra. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, let me give an example.
Please go ahead.
Suppose suppose a seminar is getting arranged, okay, in our college. I belong to, I am from Hooghly, West Bengal, near Kolkata.
Right.
So regarding the arrangement, all the taking care of the, that means receiving the guests, arranging for their food and those things, especially just which are typical, they are just typically attached to the female colleagues, to us, okay. And regarding the technical parts, that is sound and all those things, and money, that money management, how much money to be assigned to this part and that and all those things, okay.
Right.
Those things are by default as if our male colleagues, most of them don't even know the price for those things, or the we have to tell them how much money is needed, but the final decisions are being taken by them. But we have to just receive the guests, arrange for the flowers and the food part, and it hurts. It really hurts.
Right.
That just came to my mind because right now a seminar is going to get arranged in our college, so it just came to my mind.
Thank you so much, Sanghamitra. That's such a valid point. But I have a follow-up question to ask you before I go ahead. And good that you mentioned this, because next I was going to talk something on those lines. So have you ever tried to go and say, I want to do this job, or I want to take care of finances?
During first time, when at first I joined, one or two of us tried to just, it's not that they deliberately or just directly shunned us away, not that, but the whole body language is as if I cannot specifically mention the points they made, but somehow the total atmosphere got changed, as if we are trading into a situation, into a space which is not for us. They do not specifically make any statement.
Right.
I cannot remember that. Still, a kind of vibe works on.
Right.
Even many of the female colleagues, they also don't get confident with we people. That means we are among them, but even they do not like us getting.
Okay, but should you do what they like or what you like?
Yes, we should do, but that is what I just wanted to say.
Right.
Voicing opinion.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for
Now
this.
we could not muster up that much courage.
So you have to. That's the point. Courage starts with one action, right? If that is what I was saying in the beginning, that as women we are told not to take that space, not to take that place. So you probably went and asked 1 time, 2 times, and then you felt okay, everybody was indifferent, people were looking at you as if you have asked for moons and stars. So you have to continue and say that no, this is what I want and this is what I'll have, right? So as a woman, you have to fight for your place, because if you are confident that you're great with finances, why not, right? So that's stereotype. But you also mentioned a very good stereotype that women are. So that is of course a sadly an example of women objectification as well, because we think that women's role should be limited to welcoming people, decorating, and just doing the trophy things which look beautiful, things which look pretty, right? But if you do not take that stand, then later on we cannot have this seminar. If all of us decide that we are going to make that change at individual level, then I would want these seminars, honestly speaking, to just go away, because when they go away, it means we have done our job well. Right?
Yes.
So next time you please go and say that no, this is what I want to do, whatever why just ignore.
Yes.
Hi. Hi,
Thank you.
good afternoon, ma'am. Hi, good
Yes.
afternoon, ma'am.
Hi,
Yeah.
Roshan. Good afternoon.
Yeah, I just want to add up to this particular conversation what the stereotype is taking on.
Sure.
So here, the one thing what I wanted to add is like, as she said, yeah, it's in a common way. Many of the places have not yet changed with this concept, but still, as we being a young people, if we work on ourselves, like as you said, ki we have to raise our voices. So I belong to a Muslim family, right? Not only just if I tell you in general like a Muslim family, but rather than the Muslim family also, in other religion also, the most of the girls or the women, they are not sent out of the state or
Right.
any other places to study or to acquire their dreams. But as you said, Kay, we have to raise our own voice, right? So what when I completed my master's, I was the one from my single family, like the one who asked or like protested or requested to just go out to Kerala for a studies to for a further study. So when I did it, well, I worked for it, so I was allowed to go there. So as you said, I agree with that. Ki we are the one, we can change, bring a change in it. Unless we don't stand up, the things cannot be changed from a negative to the positive concept.
Right. And thank you for sharing your story. I'm sure, it'll empower so many others like you.
Yeah.
So the point is not to fight. The point is not to argue. The point is to say, this is what I want,
Yes.
and this is what I want because of this,
Yes.
right?
That's
So sometimes people confuse feminism with becoming so that is why there's a term also called radical feminism, that no matter what you talk about, this woman is just going to raise that flag
Yeah.
and everything is wrong with the world and men are this and men are that.
Yeah, that's
Certainly not. That is in fact the very definition of feminism is equality, which means
equality.
you cannot raise that slogan of violence against men every
No,
time.
no,
Or not every
definitely.
time you want out of life.
Just bringing the equality, like how men are sent out of the places to study or to acquire their dreams. So we women also have the equal right to just acquire our own dreams and to stand up on our own self, like in that perspective.
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really,
Thank you, ma'am.
really appreciate that. Great. So I think two very good points from the examples that we had from people here. So I was going to talk a little bit about Naomi Wolf, again, one of very famous, very popular feminists. She has written this wonderful book called Beauty Myth. I suggest if you have not read it, please go back and read it. So Beauty Myth basically talks about, and this kind of corroborates the point I think Sangamitra raised, that not only men, but sometimes even women would look at you if you are trying to go away from the stereotypes. So Beauty Myth primarily talks about that how, since ages, women have been kind of set in this role that their job is to just look pretty, doll up, and that's about it. That all they have to do is to look beautiful, to look pretty. And also how this idea of prettiness, how this idea of beauty has been imposed as the only talent that they can have, right? So when you are, and further, very interestingly, Naomi Wolf, actually points out in this book that by continuously perpetuating this idea that, oh, you're so beautiful, you're like a goddess, and you're worshipping, you're idealizing the woman because of her beauty, it is a very subtle way of negating all her intelligence. It is a way of saying that a woman is just a pretty face. There's nothing more to a woman than a pretty face. So I think how women have been objectified is one of the strongest elements that needs to be paid attention to. If you look at even movies, Bollywood, Hollywood, if you look at ads, every now and then you will see a woman is objectified. And the sad part is many women don't even realize that they are being objectified. So if someone, I forgot who said this, that if you pay a compliment on, if you tell me that I'm more beautiful than I'm intelligent, I'll take it as an insult, right? Because you think that my face deserves more marks because of my genetics or whatever, rather than the intelligence that I have acquired over a period of time. So I think there are a lot of subtle instances that go on in not ensuring what we call equity. Objectification of women is one such case. We do not even realize it. Every time you watch an advertisement on the TV also, you will, now things are changing a little bit, as somebody said, but more or less, if there is ever an ad to wash clothes or a washing powder, it is always a woman you will see in the TV. Very rarely you will see a man, right? However, if there is a car or a new model of a wonderful sports car or aeroplane, you'll see a man, always a man. Right? So these things are subtly creating the pattern of power. They are perpetuating that pattern of power, which we must adhere, which we must pay attention to. We must see that in our daily lives, we are not kind of recreating those patterns. We are not recreating the paradigms that have been there in place, for ages and ages now. Another place, another area where I think you can almost very, very starkly look at a lack of equity is at workplace. So not only women workforce is less in terms of percentage globally, but in terms of promotions, in terms of acquiring leadership positions, it will always be the man who will be preferred, who will be given that raise, given that promotion. And another area where we look at equity and equality could also be about our day-to-day relationship, our day-to-day choices that we make. So for example, when if you have a male colleague, you would know, he just probably has to bring his tiffin to work, and that's about it, and eat it and then go back home. However, if it is a woman, she has to take care of 100 other things before she comes to work, right? Maybe she has to cook food, maybe she has to, even if there is a maid, she is the one who has to take care of the maid also, right? So these are very little instances which I think in our daily life we do not even realize are contributing to that gross injustice, that atrocity that we talk about. And also, I think in how we engage with our bodies, how we engage with our dressing. Dr. Nishat was talking about that. So I think dressing, engaging with our bodies, how we walk, how we sit. So I remember, I love Maya Angelou's poetry. I'm sure all of you would have read. Still I Rise is one of my all-time favorite poems. Closer Home, Kamala Das is one of the earliest feminists, of course, in Indian literature, but also very bold, very courageous, even, in her confessions about her relationship with love, her relationship with body. I remember today, it's been more than 10 years now since I did my master's, but I remember when my teacher was teaching the poem, one of the poems, I think it was Glass House. It had to do with, it talked a little bit about menstruation in a certain way. I remember I was feeling so embarrassed sitting in that class reading that poem, right? That was 10 years ago. Still, apparently we were in third wave of feminism, right? But in Indian context, so now when I look back, I was like, oh, why did I feel that way about it, right? So all this is a kind of combination of a lot of things that we do on everyday basis, that we engage without even consciously realizing it. So next time when somebody comes to you and says, okay, I want to know the meaning of this poem, and you are yourself like, okay, no, this you can just go back and read on your own. You are already engaging in making woman what you call subaltern. You are already saying that, oh no, a woman's body probably during this time is polluted. It's not to be talked about. It is hush hush, right? So I think these are little things that, as a scholar, I have learned over a period of time. I would not say I'm a feminist theorist, no. But I think in my everyday practices as a teacher, So when I'm in a classroom, I try to make sure that I am treating all my students equally, irrespective of their gender. And as long and until actually we start doing this, I don't think we are really going to see any phenomenal change that we are looking at. However, now coming to the good part of it, there are some areas which I think have been significantly impacted and significantly. I have 5 more minutes, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think there are certain areas which have been significantly changed or transformed over a period of time. So one major example that comes to my mind is rise of OTT in India. A lot of web series that have come in, and these web series have, to my knowledge, positively contributed to what we call equity in a lot of ways. Which so of course there is a question of what is decent, what is right for what age. So of course all those debates, all those questions remain, but keeping that aside, I think a lot of series and a lot of movies even in Indian cinema have kind of come up strongly with female protagonists. They have come up strongly with female protagonists who are strong, who are empowered, who do not care, and whose relationships do not define their personality, whose relationships do not define their life. If you are married, great. If you're not married, equally great. So I think movies and series in a lot of ways have changed that. If you look at, on top of my head, I can think of even Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara for that matter. It was an old, relatively old movie, but I think it changed, the dynamics of how a woman's life is not always defined by a relationship. Or if you look at different web series, there is one called Four More Shots, or there is a series called Bold. There is this woman character who's a journalist. She has her own share of problems, but then she goes on. And even chick flick like Emily in Paris, for that matter. So all these series kind of are now creating a role model, probably would not be a right word, but creating a space for women to acknowledge and accept that it is all right to be who you are. You do not always have to seek the validation and acknowledgement of the next man in your life, be it your father, be it authority, be it your brother, or be it world at large, or be it other fellow women also for that matter. And another important change, which I think has also come globally, is in companionships that have happened. So one example that I can think of is the example of Meghan Markle and Harry, right? So if you look at their life story, there are a lot of life lessons to be learned on feminism there. In fact, their interview with Oprah, in fact, had a share of ups and downs as well. But I think these kind of changes, these kind of so one could of course argue that they are celebrities, so Oprah Winfrey could interview them and their story could be all over the place. But what about an ordinary average woman? What about people like you and us? So I think that is the question that Sangamitra was also asking, and I think that is why it is so important that we start raising our voice now. And raising your voice has nothing to do with being loud. It has nothing to do with being feisty. It has nothing to do with being odd one out. Raising your voice simply means saying, this is who I am. I will not be treated any differently just because I am a woman. Right? And last but not least, I think in movies again, and why I'm talking so much about movies or literature is because movies or literature of any time are a reflection of the times that we are living in. Right? So you also see now in a lot of series, a lot of movies, there is this gender role reversal. You will see house husband taking care of a child at some places. So I think gradually we are moving to that space. How far we are yet to go, I am not sure. But at the same time, I can definitely say that I think I'm very hopeful that with the way things are going, how women are entering workforce, how we are getting educated, how we are getting opportunities to, now because now the world has become a global platform, right? So you can be connected to academicians sitting around the world. You can connect with anyone. So I think for me, a moment would become any moment we are gradually inching towards that time when we can say that, okay, we are equals. But I think more than any outside change, more than any outside law, of course, all those are positive forces, all those laws, all those schemes that are going on do help us in feeling more empowered. But I think all the change has to come from within, because I think that is the main premise. Until and unless you decide that you're not going to be treated like a doormat, until and unless we as women decide that our opinion matters, that I'm not foolish, even if my idea is stupid, so what? Maybe next time I'm going to improvise it. So I think until and unless we acquire that kind of courage, and we we start adopting these little practices into our daily lives, till then I think we're just going to theorize about it. And that is why I think theorizing is good. Theorizing gives us a moment of epiphany or two, but in the long run, if we are really, really looking for change, if you really ask me, as I said earlier, the real change will be when you do not need to celebrate Women's Day, right? Because every day is a woman's day, every day is a man's day, every day is a day for everybody, right? But why we are doing this is because we think this needs attention, and rather than just making it an exercise which is academic, I think we should focus more on the practical aspect of it. So I'm going to stop here, and I would like to take some questions, engage in some sort of discussion, take your inputs. Sanmitra, you have something to add, or I think you forgot to put down your hand? Anybody else? Okay. Over to you, Zainab. Or yes.
Thank you, Dr. Sakshi, for such an insightful lecture. Now, I request Professor Nishat Arif Hussaini, Dean, Faculty of Languages, Arts and Humanities, Sciences and the Social Sciences, and Chairperson of the Department of English, to give her concluding remarks, after which we will throw the floor open for questions.
Right.
Yes, because I think there is Ikhra coming up with the question. She typed out a question just now. So
I'll read out those
Ikhra,
questions for Dr. Sakshi.
yes, Ikhra, you must not leave this, and you will ask those questions to Dr. Sakshi after we are done with this. I'll only take a few minutes. It's not going to be a very, detailed analysis of what you've spoken about, Dr. Sakshi, because this has been very relaxed and quite extempore that you have spoken about. I would just take your last remark and say, that the change would be when Women's Day is not celebrated. I would just say, hip hip hooray. I think many people should get out of this. Is one of those mindsets which I was talking about, that people slip into it.
Right.
See, because I have about 11 departments under me, and we have several male teachers who are very well aware of everything that's going on, and I'm very happy to say that most of them are very accommodating. In fact, they're very broad-minded. But still, there are a couple of them who would come up and say that we would like to celebrate Women's Day, and we would like to do it. You sit back and relax. I said, no, that won't be a compliment to us, because we don't want to be garlanded and then taken for sati.
Exactly.
Because that was what was done earlier as well.
Yeah.
And this is the change that we are striving for. I think in many places they have stopped celebrating this as a particular day, apart from making posters and sending out messages on WhatsApp. But this is what is known as change, which takes place from it. Then you protest, you don't like, then you don't do. You just have to stand up and say, and which is what we are all striving to do. And you would be surprised, all of you, I'm sure, that the most traditional looking women have had the strongest voices, which I've experienced in my life and career. some of the most practical, down to earth kind of resistance comes from people, women who had been working for us. There was this particular, very, I found her very attractive. She was very dark, but she was absolutely a beauty. So she would come for doing the field work and for gardening.
Mm-hmm.
So Sharnamma was very practical. She said, no, if you don't like that, get out of it in any relationship. So she did, she walked out of one marriage because the husband was, had taken to so much of drinking and would not stop into, I mean, he didn't even try to get out of the habit. And he had this odd kind of a painful habit of beating up his wife before others, dragging her into the street or lane. So she just walked out. She left whatever was there, and then she lived happily. And then I think she went into another marriage. So this kind of, and she was very down to earth about it. She faced people. She talked to them. She did her work. She earned her money, and she managed her money. So it's not just about being equal to women. The worst, I think, situations arise when someone very close to you has not changed the mindset.
Right.
And that I have seen happening between mothers and sons. Sons take up the mantle of dominating their, mothers and sisters, where the father has left off.
Yes.
So it's all about taking a stand. It's all about proving yourself to yourself. And that is what self worth is all about. I would like to thank Dr. Sakshi Chanana for joining us and for giving us a very fresh and mm, a different perspective. I'm really glad. This seems to be, quite, it has scope for a lot of further meetings,
Yes.
further interactions. And maybe, traveling has become so common. You could travel down south here and see a Khaja Bandanawaz University,
I
because
would
we
love
have,
that.
yes, we have uh, etched out our individuality against other state universities and are standing by it. And I think the most forward looking person is our chancellor himself.
Wow.
Yes, he has been, you know, a kind of a feminist in the sense that he has never stopped women from entering into various fields and competitive fields. The first concern he had was for girls by setting up institutes. So that is one thing I'm sure you'd be so happy to see. So, with this invitation and with thanking all the participants, I would like to thank Dr. Zainab and Dr. Atia and Dr. Safi for being very active in organizing this. And thank you, Zainab, for introducing Dr. Sakshi Chanana to us. So, I would like to end this here, but I don't want the people who have been asking questions to leave this site and go. Greetings from Indonesia. Greetings back to you from India.
Yes.
Welcome, and please go on with the questions.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, ma'am, for your reflections. It's time to throw the floor open to our audience. I will be the moderator of the Q&A session. I request the audience to type out their questions if they have any or comments in the chat box, and I'll read out to them to Dr. Sakshi. You may also turn on your video and directly put forth your questions. We have a
Bianca
bunch of
has
questions
raised a
coming up in
hand.
the chat. Yes, ma'am?
Safi sir, you maybe you can take up those who have raised their hands first, or those who have written out their comments first, and you tell
Yes, ma'am.
them how you're going to take them.
Yes, ma'am. So I would like to read out the questions put in the chat box first so that we can go to the people who have raised their hands later. So the first question is one by one of our students from post-graduation. Is equity more important than equality, she asks.
Okay, great question, Ikra. Very interesting question. So I think first, equality, there has to be equality for equity to exist in the first place. So that goes without saying. Equality means that one should have equal access to resources, opportunities. Equity more or less kind of signifies the ability to understand that different people come with different backgrounds. There are certain sections of society which are not as privileged as other sections. So for example, in this particular case, we have been talking about women. So equality for women is, so let's say a man has a right to vote, a woman has a right to vote. That's equality, right? But if I'm talking, let us say, for example, about workplace, if I'm talking about, let's say there are two children in the house, a brother and a sister, who gets to go abroad? Let's say there's money only in the house for one kid to go away. So generally you see that it is the boy or it's the man who is sent abroad. So equity warrants that you have to take into account other context, other background, other situations of a given community or a given section. So if you think about reservation, for example, so we have reservation in India because of equity, not equality, right? So there's this whole debate about that. So I think if we talk about women, and if I say that, if I talk about women's equity, what it implies is that you have to understand that women have been marginalized for centuries and centuries. For ages and ages, women did not have a voice. So if you are trying to create a scheme for a woman, for example, I can think on top of my head that if you travel in Delhi Metro, there are two seats reserved for women in each coach. So now somebody can argue it is not equality, but is it equity or not, right? So I think equity is not more important than equality, but equity is important to ensure that there is equality in true sense of the term. Without truly understanding equity, there can be no equality as well. Does that answer your question, Ikra? Okay, great. Moving on.
Another question is, why is equity even important in life? I guess you've answered some part of that before.
Yes.
Another question is, this is from Sangamitra Thakur, how to handle patronizing attitudes to some of our male colleagues, how to set boundaries.
Okay, this is interesting question, good one at that. But at the same time, again, very relative. I think one of the ways in which one can handle patronizing attitude, not only of male colleagues, but even anyone for that matter, but especially of male colleagues, could be to, first of all, be clear of what your own preferences are, which means until and unless you know what is non-negotiable for you, you will never be able to say no. For example, sometimes at workplace, what happens is somebody, let's say a male colleague comes to you and says, oh, you should do this for me, or can you, I don't know, whatever tone. So let us say you are given a task, or say somebody is coming to you with and is kind of trying to invalidate your point of view. All you can say is that I don't agree with this. While you may have your point, but this is not how I feel. This is not what I think. This is my opinion. So I think you can start with these little assertions of your own opinion. So every time somebody is patronizing you, every time somebody is telling you they know the best or they know what is better for you, you can very politely say that, no, I don't agree with this. I don't think this is right for me. So I think with these little things, you can set your boundaries. Or if you have some example in your mind, you can always tell me, and then we can take it forward.
There is another question, ma'am, over here.
Yeah. Dr. Athia, are you asking a question?
Yeah. Just.
Okay.
Yeah. Why is reservation considered equality? Why should there be reservations for women at all?
Okay, so good question again. Thank you. So I think when we talk of reservation, we are actually, I was actually pointing out to reservation for marginalized, not marginalized, reservation for the SC, ST, OBC that we have in Indian Constitution. But if we are talking here, why is reservation considered equality? So in that case, where the government has, enshrined all these reservation policies, equity comes into play here. It's been believed that these people have been denied the privilege of access to resources over a period of time. For example, if you look at Indian history, I do not know the very specific details of it, but if you look at Indian history and caste system, you will see Brahmins have always been the privileged ones, right? And there is this long history of Brahmins exploiting, oppressing, like they were majorly either the Pandits or even the landlords. And if you read Dalit literature, or if you read literature from the margins, you will see that there has been a lot of caste oppression. And since now it has been almost 75 years since our independence, now it is important that we kind of, although it is sad because there is no paying back for oppression, there is no paying back for exploitation. Literally, I don't think that giving somebody a job does justice to all the oppression you have done on them for years. But having said that, that is the government's way, that is the constitution's government way, I will not say constitution. That was the way of ensuring that these people did not have privilege. These people were exploited. These people were oppressed for years. And that is why now gradually we have to create policies, we have to create social systems to bring them at par with others, to bring them into what we call mainstream, right? And should there be reservation for women at all? It is a question that requires a whole seminar. But again, I think it is very relative. If you ask me, I don't think there should be reservation for women. I think we are good enough and we can equality. So people who support equity will say probably women reservation is equitable way of making women at par with the world at large. But I think, personally, if you ask me, I don't think there should be reservation for women. But again, reservation for women is also there to kind of bring that equity, to bring women into main streamline. So also, again here, why I'm able to say this, that I don't need a reservation, because I am already a privileged woman, right? I'm educated, I hold a good position, I'm economically all good. But if you look at government's law in panchayat, now 33% of the positions can be filled by women. So I think for them, it is not only equality, but it is also equity. So it is good for them, right? So for me, I think there should be no reservations, but in larger scheme, I think reservation for women, at least for next 10, 20 years, would ensure equity that we have been talking about throughout the class, throughout the session. Okay.
There's another question, but I don't know if this is going to fall under the scope of our short webinar. Okay. But if you could throw some light on it. Again, another student asks, what is the role of feminist literature in bringing equality to women in patriarchal society?
Yeah, so good. Good. This is a good question again. So all the names that we kind of very briefly touched upon. So whether it was Simone de Beauvoir who talked about the second sex, and very fascinating that it was called, women are called the second sex because of their marginal position. So be it Simone de Beauvoir's works or Kamala Das' poetry, or I'm sure today's generation knows Rupi Kaur. She talks a lot about women, her body, her emotions. So I think all the feminist literature, even the ones written by men, so I'm not saying all feminist literature is written by women, I'm just talking about women at the moment. So I think all the feminist literature may not directly impact or directly help to fight patriarchy, but I think when women start writing about their experiences, they are putting themselves out, they're putting their voice out, they are kind of challenging that locus of control of patriarchy that exists even in literature, right? So if you are a literature student, you will see most of the times, if there are 10 books, 6 out of 10 you will be reading by male authors, right? So when feminist literature is written, it is disseminated, it is discoursed about, like what we're doing today, it opens new pathways for policy changes as well. So let us assume if today there is somebody who's in a leadership position in like your dean is here, let's say somebody else is here, and they're listening to this conversation, and then you say that, oh, I want to read or I want to write poems and they should be included in a college magazine, so on and so forth. So I think feminist literature helps in fighting patriarchy by putting your voice out. If you do not know what you want, if you do not talk about what you want, again, going back to the similar theme, we are never going to be able to fight patriarchy, because when you don't speak up, it means you're okay with whatever is happening around you.
One more question. Where would equity and equality mean the same?
Where would equality and equity mean the same? As in, I am not very clear about the question. Like, do you mean in what cases?
In what cases would it mean the same? I guess that's the drift.
Right. So as I said earlier, equality includes equity in certain ways, which means if I say men and women have, so for example, if you talk about, I think, Article 39 of Indian Constitution, right to equal pay, probably. Okay, so that is equality, right? So let us say this is what is enshrined in our Constitution, and in an organization where actually men and women are paid same, then equity becomes equality and equity becomes same. So which means equality is a kind of not a policy, a directive, but when that directive is applied in real world, then you say that you have also taken equity into account and not only equality.
Priyanka Bakshi has raised her hand, so
Yes,
if she could
yes,
turn out.
yes. She's been, it's been a while. Yes, Priyanka, go ahead.
Hi, Sakshi. It's been wonderful hearing you. It was so motivating.
Thank you.
So, greetings from the Department of Food and Nutrition. So, my question is how to handle this pressure of societal approval and acceptance when you are taking this changes, when you're transforming? How to handle that? I mean, somebody could not be on the same stage where you are. Maybe somebody who is not approving any progressive thought which you are in concern to. So, this approval and acceptance and fitting into the society, that's my question.
Okay, good. Very good question, and important one for that. So I think, first of all, the question that you have to ask yourself is, why are you seeking anybody's approval?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Yes,
and it is related to your second part, to fit in. So you have to, I think you have to ask yourself questions. Why am I seeking their approval? What will happen if I don't fit in? Because let me tell you, 90% of people around you will not approve of the changes when you will.
Yes, true.
90%.
Correct.
Which means you have to have that conviction, and you have to come from a place which is right for you. So if, let us say, you want to make a decision and you know that people around you are not going to approve it, then you have to say, I believe in it, I want to do it, I am doing it either way, even if you don't approve of it. And you will see the minute you say it, the approval will come. Yes. People want people to follow them. Women especially are led to believe that they have to follow. They have to fit in. Have you ever seen any man being told that? That, oh, you have to fit in, you have to ask me?
No, never.
Then why should we? But again, back to the same thing, that we have to be very sure of why we are saying what we are saying. We should just not start fighting with people because we want to say, I am a woman, I do everything right. No, certainly not. That is wrong, even if a man does it and even if a woman does it. So I think the question that you have to ask yourself is, why do you need approval from anybody?
Yes, that's
and it is a tough question. Maybe you'll get answer in 2-3 hours or 2-3 days or 2-3 weeks, but it's often worth asking. And I think the day women stop seeking approval, a lot will change for all of us.
Yeah, it's totally wrong. I mean, seeking approval, but yeah, when you are in a scope when you are in course of transformation, these hurdles will come, and therefore, definitely we should have a confidence and we should go for the change. Yeah. So, thank you. It was very helpful. Thank you,
Priyanka, for your question.
Yeah, it is like, what is the change you want to see? The change is you.
Yes.
Roshan Deepa has also raised her hand.
Okay.
If she wants to ask another question.
Good evening, everyone.
So the question I wanted to ask, like, as ma'am have explained it in very brief, like what is the difference between or what is the equality and equity. But when we talk about like the concepts of equity, equality, like what is the main difference between the equity, the gender equality, and the women empowerment?
Okay, good question again. So gender, if you talk about, so as I said, gender equality would be that men, people, not men and women, again, that's not a right word. Now we have third gender also. So gender equality means all genders should have equal rights, okay? So let's say when it comes to right to vote, right to decent living, right to practice their own religion, so that is gender equality. Gender equity means taking into account that different genders come with their own history, which needs to be taken into account when you are making decisions around gender equality. So, for example, if you take example of transgenders, okay, or if you take examples of third gender, LGBTQ, so you
Yes.
have to remember that how they have been marginalized historically, and even the laws around them, even though in India we have a law in favor of them, but if you go out you will see that their acceptance level is still very low, right?
Yeah.
So the moment you become aware of this context and then further create systemic changes within the society, then you are also ensuring equity for them as well as equality for them. So if equality says all genders should be equally treated, but if you see any queer person and you treat them differently, you think, oh, hush hush, they are abnormal, they are different, they are silly, they are stupid, whatever labels you give to
Yeah.
them, you are not engaging in equity, right? Third point that you were talking about is women empowerment. So women is just one of the genders, right? So when you talk
Yeah.
of women empowerment, you are talking of giving power to women. And again, that is a discussion I would probably want to have some other day, because I think
Yeah.
nobody can give power to women if they don't realize their own power.
Definitely.
So power is not something somebody gives to you. Power is something who you are. Right? But at the same time, there have to be systemic changes. So if you, so for example, if you go back to time period before 1920s when women had no right to vote, and then you
Hmm.
are saying that okay, only men can vote, and women were like, okay, why, what? Nobody even asked it, right? So at that time, you could say that we are giving power by giving right to vote. So that was a systemic change. But today, I think women empowerment would include more of abstract things like accepting, letting them
Hmm.
choose, not patronizing them, not thinking that, oh, it is numbers, it is finance, women cannot do it. It is changing the roles. It is being okay with being an equal partner. So
Yeah.
these are this is a brief explanation of the question.
Thank you so much. It literally gave a clear idea of it.
Well, thanks.
Can I
Dr.
ask one
Sakshi,
more
one more
question?
question that I would like to ask.
Yes, who is this?
Uh, One last question, and we will end the session.
I know. Okay, yes, yes, please.
So,
Then.
one question is that is women empowerment really related to the kind of dress a woman wear? What do you think about that?
Is women? Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Women empower Women empowerment is really related to the kind of dress they wear.
No, not
What
at
do you think
all.
about that?
Not at all. Not at all. You can be powerful in salwar suit and you can be powerful in skirt and a top. So power has nothing to do with your dress, but it definitely, like I think when we talk about how women dress, has to do more with right to choose, which means nobody should be telling women what to wear, what not to wear. If you feel like
Yes,
you can
that's
feel powerful
exactly.
in anything, like I feel super powerful when I'm wearing a sari, but I also feel powerful when I'm wearing a business suit. So I think it is an inside job.
Thank you so
Can
much,
I
Dr. Sakshi.
can I ask one more question?
Yes,
Like
yes.
as today's discussion is basically about the equity and the equality,
Hmm.
and we also discussed some points about the feminism as well, right?
Right.
So my question is like the goals of feminism is
Hmm.
really to create the equity or the equality,
Both.
both of them.
Started with equality. Started with equality because we were so oppressed for years and
Yes.
years.
So the both comes into the equal portion.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I hope nobody has any more questions. We are drawing to a close now. At this juncture, I would like to thank Professor Nishad Arif Hussaini for her kind guidance and support in the organization of this webinar. I express my deep gratitude to the guest speaker, Dr. Sakshi Chanana, for her generosity in accepting our invitation to speak today. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and we look forward to collaborating with you in many more endeavors in the future. I would like to also thank my colleagues, Dr. Atia and Zainab, without whose help this webinar would not have been possible. And I'm sure they would. I thank all the participants for their presence here. I'm sure they would be taking away much from this session. We are going to share the feedback form in the chat box and in the WhatsApp group. Please fill in to receive your e-certificates. I thank you all once again. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I would just like to take a minute. Thank you so much, Dr. Sakshi, Zainab, Dr. Atya, and special thanks to Dr. Nisha for your generous invitation. I would really love to, be there with you guys in person someday.
Thank you, Sakshi.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really lovely.
It was really great to have you here, ma'am, as well as it was very interactive and very informative session with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone here. It was a great session. It was a pleasure to have this wonderful session with you all. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.